Taking a while. There we go. Welcome back. We're here with General Housing, and we are going to take our final block of the morning with Angus Cheney, who's working in Rutland. Angus, I'll let you identify what you do and how you do it, but first we're going to go around the room. The committee has, as we always do, changed. Our lineup is 75% different than last year, so we just wanted to introduce ourselves to you. And I'll start. Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury.
Representative Saudia Lamont from Morristown, but Livermore, Washington District.
Joe Parsons, represent Topsom, Groton, and Newbury.
Emily Krosnow, South Burlington.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax and Georgia.
Dennis LeBounty, Sutton, Newark, Linden, Wheelock, Sheffield.
Elizabeth Burrows, Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Larry Labor, Orleans, Essex 1.
Mary Howard, Rutland City District 6.
Robin Chestnut Tangerman. Let me try that again.
Did you have one of his?
Okay.
I haven't even doctored it up yet.
Take two. Robin Chestnut Tangerman, Middletown Springs, Follett, Rupert, Wells, and Tinman.
So Angus, I wanted you to come in to introduce yourselves. We're taking this time at the beginning of the session to really do a very broad introductory session, just to let our committee know, and I'm really happy that we're actually slow in getting bills here, so we've been able to take our time with introductions. And but also, given your focus of homelessness, we wanted to, not only take an introductory journey with you, but also to let us know what's going on in how you're viewing the next several months as we're changing programs into what I guess we want to call a post-pandemic era. But if you can address some of the issues that you're seeing and that we're going to see here statewide moving forward on the homelessness issues across, again, across your service area, but just in general, you're tapped in pretty deeply to the system. And we'd just love to get your thoughts.
Great. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with this committee. And for the record, my name is Angus Cheney. I'm Executive Director, Homeless Prevention Center in Rutland County, Vermont. And just to give you a little context of what we do before we dive into some of the challenges that I want to talk about. We have been doing this for over 20 years. We work with people who are either homeless, at risk, or anywhere in between. We stay with them, often providing case management once they're rehoused so that they don't have to cycle back and try homelessness again. Last year, we assisted over 480 Vermonters who were homeless or at risk. And we currently, as of today, we're working with 110 households, and that's 132 adults and their 95 children. We chair the local continuum of care, which I think you may have already heard about a little bit, what that process looks like. And I think that you've had a good presentation. We've had a couple good presentations already. I think, I believe Sarah Phillips was in from the Office of Economic Opportunity, or at least submitted some information providing that really rich description of some of the different services and programs that organizations like ours can provide. So if you've seen that, we provide that homeless outreach and engagement. We do the housing assessments, which are a big part of the coordinated entry process. We provide homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing. We provide client financial assistance and rental assistance on behalf of the county. So other organizations will submit requests for that as well. We sponsor both state and federal targeted rental subsidies. So we're not a housing authority, but we are the sponsor for some of the focused subsidies, particularly for people who are experiencing homelessness. We have a youth housing navigation program, provide housing search, case management, and retention. We have a handful of emergency apartments. We have a landlord liaison program, and she helps landlords connect with programs that I think you've heard about, like such as BHIP. And we have permanent supportive housing, both for families and individuals. And then a lot of really good partnerships. So the list of people to thank would take up all of our time. But just bear in mind that even though a lot of times when I say we do this, it's we with a lot of really good partners, some of whom I hope you got to meet at Homelessness Awareness Day, or we'll meet later on in the session. So that's the fun part, I guess, and I think that's also the part we know. I think I was asked to, the chair would like me to speak a little bit to what I see coming, and I don't know. I don't know what's coming really as of March 31st. And perhaps from that unknown, I actually want to pivot a little bit. And while it may not be why I was asked here today, I think it's really critical that this committee understands how there's a homeless system of care, and there's homeless funding and homeless programs and projects, but the idea that we're not impacted by changes in other systems of care, that's the kind of idea we have to smash, is that homelessness is indicative of challenges in other systems of care, whether that's economic and dealing with affordability and housing supply, or transportation or childcare, or residential treatment, a little bit of everything. But I debated on whether to try to get super into the details of this program and its future, or actually pull back and try to make a case for seeing how some of these other system issues and systems of care are affecting the current reality on the ground. So I want to make time for both the good news and the not so good news, and I hope I can do that in a balanced way. We wouldn't still be doing this work if there wasn't tremendous satisfaction at the individual level, working with individual Vermonters and individual Vermont families through some of the toughest periods of their lives, and then attaining something which they might have even thought was unattainable, and then seeing them succeed in housing, and then subsequently succeed in other goals that are the goals that make them unique. I also I will not sort of provide an anecdote or a narrative for the people we work with, because they are far too diverse, and it would not be fair to the other hundreds of people that I would leave out. But just if you come away with something, bear in mind that really of the 480 people we worked with last year, no two had quite the same story or experience. And just try to remember how diverse that group of people experiencing homelessness can be. And perhaps you already know this. I don't know where everybody starts with their baseline. So if it feels like I'm preaching to the choir, or this is repeat, I apologize for that. I want to provide just a snapshot of what I see happening in Rutland, and then we can try to wrestle it down and try to figure out where these incongruencies are coming from. So HPC has been rehousing people who are homeless at a record pace since the start of the pandemic. So it's starting in January 2020. We really wanted to be able to, I think it was coming out of a period of wanting to shift the focus from the doom and gloom and the sky is falling to, yeah, but look at what the successes are. So we want to make our case managers aware of, in aggregate, how many success stories there are, how many people we are rehousing. Since we started tracking that really much more scientifically back to January 2020, that number as of today is 412 people in Rutland County that we've rehoused who were homeless. And they weren't just doubled up with family or friends, but they met the HUD definition of homeless, which is different. So that feels good. We also have effective programs to prevent homelessness among those who are deemed at risk. And I give a lot of credit for that, obviously to the staff here, but also to the state OEO. I think the state OEO really does know how to support these approaches around preventing homelessness. And I think we're pretty good at it here. It's in our name, but I don't think we would have figured this all out on our own without that sort of support from from state partners. And yet there remain a staggering number of people who are homeless in Rutland County with new people arriving. So we've been running a sprint pace at a marathon distance. We're having these successes, and yet the numbers that you'll hear presented, I think, from the program, like the transitional housing program, the numbers are pretty staggering as to how many people are in motels, whether they're in there with occupancy agreements in the transitional housing program or under adverse weather in the general assistance program. So it looks like, and some of this data is secondhand, so I would not be insulted if you wanted to go to the source and really get it from the state of Vermont and make sure that I have it correct. But what I see is that there are currently over 1,300 households in DCF's transitional housing program. That's the people who have occupancy agreements. So that's statewide. And that roughly 24% of those households they're placed in Rutland County right now. And I use that word intentionally, placed. I'll get to that in a minute. Just for some context, Rutland makes up less than 10% of the total state population. So I did a little math this morning. It's almost a quarter of people placed in transitional housing in Rutland County, and our county is slightly less than 10% of Vermont's population. And that doesn't include people who are maybe placed in motels through the general assistance program. I understand from testimony you received last week that there were 500 households in GA motels at that time. And it looks like if it's apples to apples with what we're counting, roughly, again, a quarter, so about 125 households are in the GA motels under adverse weather. So you might, whether you want to think of those groups separately as transitional housing with occupancy agreements, general assistance with under adverse weather, or think of them collectively, those are some sort of raw numbers to work with. So I think it's also critically important with the newly constituted committee to sort of understand what, at least from my perspective, what I would attribute some of the successes to in terms of how we were able to rehouse that many people. And I list there, I would say Vermont's coordinated entry system is a part of that, so that people in crisis can quickly access the correct resources. It's far more modern and sophisticated than it was when I started in this type of work over 20 years ago. It was very much, you got what we had if you could find us. You got what we had if you could find us, to much easier to access the system, and then easier for everybody to connect with, theoretically, the service, the housing, the assistance, the case management that will be effective to their circumstance. Very generous of financial assistance and rental assistance for tenants, and a lot of those are through time-limited programs such as rapid resolution, CARES vouchers, et cetera. Rehousing rehabilitation grants, those went a long way in Rutland. Those were managed out of Department of Housing and Community Development. And the latest version of that is called VHIP. And once again, they'll be targeted to people who are homeless. That'll create housing for a lot of people. Strong relationships with landlords from both the public and private sector. We can't be choosy. And so we will work with any landlord who wants to play fair and provide a quality rental. Partnerships with local housing authority and local housing trust, those have been key, especially around special projects. I think you've heard, or you will, about permanent supportive housing projects like Lincoln Place, or hybrid models like Bridge Housing in Rutland. The real stars of the show would be the social workers, case managers who do this every day, and the clients they work with. So I just say that because I'm not coming to you saying everything is broken, let's clear the slate and just go back to the drawing board. I think we have to sort of keep track of what is working, and I'm sure you could add to that list, and other people could help you add to that as to what they think is really working. So now I want to talk about some of the perceived challenges. And I say perceived because in some cases we don't have the data available to quantify these challenges. And we know the ability for anecdote to sort of take up, grow legs of its own and start to have disproportionate impact. But I think it's pretty safe to list among the perceived challenges, and I would sort of think of these as maybe program issues, that we have a large number of people placed in motels, and some of them are coming from Vermont counties that just don't have those motels. So people are, in some instances, they're losing their housing in a neighboring county, but that county lacks motels and there isn't enough sort of conventional emergency shelter capacity. And so they're going to counties that do have them. And Rutland is one of those that has a lot of relatively less expensive motel capacity. Where to some extent, and once again, this is more just what I'm seeing in program meetings and not something I can put a number on, we're seeing maybe more inflow of people from other states than we have in the past. To be fair, there may also be more Vermonters who are going to other states. It may be the pandemic, and it may be that workforce changes are just causing more mobility. And so I don't know if it's a wash or if there are more people coming to Vermont than there are Vermonters going to access services in other states. One of the challenges for us in this work is a perception that for every family we can move from a motel into housing, that there's another one right there to take its place. So you can do great work and the clients can have great success, but it doesn't feel like it's translating to improvements on the ground in terms of what the community sees as a pretty large group of people who don't have housing. We continue to have some concerns about health and safety in the motels, and I would love to see some attention given to that so that we're making sure that, I think it's gotten better, but there's some work to do. And I think we should, in many cases, we have it written down what's supposed to happen. It's just got to happen. Concerns of also, and I hear about this every day, about the safety of families experiencing homelessness who are in motels. Just concerns about what they're being exposed to, risks of exploitation, risks of physical safety, particularly when they are living close by people who are in full-blown addiction or people who are engaging in criminal activity. I want to make it really clear that that's not to say everybody who's homeless in a motel is in full-blown addiction or is engaging in criminal activity, but more to underscore that it doesn't take many on maybe the floor of a motel to really affect the environment on that floor, on that wing. And then the other thing we were starting to see recently is when folks in Rutland County who maybe experience a natural disaster such as a fire and are displaced, it didn't sound like there were motels left for them to go to. So I worry that through with the sort of this flow of people from one county to another, certain counties, and Rutland included, may not really have resources available when people lose their housing due to a fire or something sort of time limited. So I think everybody is doing their best with this. I hope I do not, in the course of my testimony today, create the idea that there are villains here, that there are people with malign motives, and that this is a state and a country trying to do the best it can under unprecedented circumstances. And as we start winding down programs, we have to get back to something a little more, sober in terms of what's a fair amount of money to provide a landlord for security deposit. It shouldn't be unlimited. It needs to be sort of back within our means. And maybe we need to look at some of these approaches to see how the current approaches might be dislocating people and making it harder for them to reconnect with the supports. So I really am making progress here. We're getting close, but when I look at that sort of that what I see as conditions on the ground, and then I try to group them. So what are really program issues, sort of maybe DCF, maybe transitional housing, and then what are broader, if you'll allow, I'll just sort of present them that way. And I'm going to sort of preface this that these are very tough conversations to have. Like you all have to get reelected to do your work, and yet some of the actions that I think would be required are not wildly popular, So I don't know how both the administration and the legislature has to wrestle with that. It's sort of like, do we do what is popular, what maybe the advocates built a consensus around, or do we stretch ourselves? And so luckily I don't have to maybe operate in quite that world, but you might not find a lot of other, I might be a minority opinion and I might be opinionated. I believe this is the truth, and I'm going to say that, and we'll see how it goes. So it seems like we have an emergency shelter system which is easier to access and possibly more appealing than that of nearby states. I just think that is what it is, and that may be a good thing for Vermonters, but it may create other challenges in terms of inflow. I also think that Vermont hasn't really figured out a way to impose a residency requirement, and unfortunately, taken in tandem, that would be explaining why, particularly in certain counties along the border, we're making huge progress ending homelessness in Vermont, but the prospect of ending homelessness in New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire is really daunting. I also think that DCF's system for providing emergency shelter and motels is not really linked with the coordinated entry system. I think I understand why. I don't think that's easy to do, but we believe there are a lot of people in motels who haven't really been connected with coordinated entry system, which is where most of these resources lie. All of those good things I listed off on the menu of financial assistance and case management and access to housing and specialized housing. Most of the doorway for most of those is really through coordinated entry. So those are what I would look at as more at the program level. And then the really fun stuff begins as where we think about what are the other system issues at play. These might not help you on the timeline you're working with about what to do with March 31st, what to do with Budget Adjustment Act, but they are so important. And at some point, we have to make time for these system issues. We have to make time for them, or we're going to be perennially struggling and doing sort of emergency responses to emergency responses. So systems issues, and I think you've probably had great testimony already on a lot of these. I'll just go through them quickly. Very low rental vacancy rates, a gap between household incomes and the housing costs for many Vermonters, gap between the rental histories of some families who are homeless and the tenant selection criteria of housing providers. And I think this is a really important one to underline. If Vermont invests in more housing for people who are homeless, will people who are homeless be eligible for it? Vermont's addiction problem is huge. We have to get really honest about that. And we also have to look at, secondary to that, does our approach with doing a lot of outpatient, but being kind of lean on residential treatment, what impact might that be having? And I think we have to look at, do we have enough residential treatment capacity for people struggling with severe mental illness or severe addiction? And that I would assert that motels are really no substitute for that. This is not my area of expertise, and there may be compelling reasons why Vermont does this, about which I'm naive, but I don't know why we're only frequently only approving 14 days of residential treatment for people who are ready to both detox, but also begin recovery. I think it takes longer than that under the best circumstances. So I think that would be a neat one to get into. And then also state policies that, while reducing spending in one area, may be nudging people from other systems of care into the homeless system of care. And I think you can sort of take your pick. The one that was on my mind this morning was some of the changes with Justice Reinvestment Act in the Department of Corrections, I think have probably shown some improvements and some savings in that area. But I would argue that if you pull back a little bit, there are people who should be in the custody of the Department of Corrections who were in motels, and they are in full-blown addiction in some cases, and it's not a wholesome environment nor a responsible one. The good news is that we have, I think Vermont is great at problem solving, coming up with solutions, and as a result, you have solutions for most of those, and some of them are either in place or coming in place soon. So when we think about some of those, the first 2 or 3 items I mentioned are really economic, they're market issues. And I think programs like VHIP will help with that. We have a lot of subsidies in Vermont now at the local housing authorities, at the state housing authority. There's a lot of, if we can tackle the supply end of that through programs like VHIP, we can then tackle the affordability piece through programs like mainstream vouchers and shelter plus care and rapid rehousing and family unification, project-based VASH vouchers. It's a long list of subsidies that are available, Vermont Rental Subsidy Program. And so I got carried away. I think I'm going to confess. In my urgency to sort of get at this problem, I'm like, yeah, but it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. And I apologize. If you'll allow me, I go through the last part of my piece here, which is, some suggestions, so that it's not just here's the issue and it's so daunting that we turn away from it. But I do think it would be great when it can happen that the legislature administration, we want to be cautious about pulling the rug out from under people in crisis until there's really an alternative to offer. I know that can be challenging in funding cycles because there isn't always the funding for the new thing until you stop the old thing. But that's something. At the same time, anytime we're running programs at such massive scale, like the huge program, which was VRAP, and the record number of people in motels, I really think we've got to think about having everything stop on a certain date doesn't work. I hope that the administration will continue to think about how we wind things down, how we plateau, how we have an off ramp and not just a cliff drop. I think it would be great to have legislature and administration have candid conversations about which state policies and approaches in other systems of care may inadvertently be contributing to the growth of homelessness in Vermont. I say that will not be popular, but I think there's precedent for that, and that as you look, there's precedent for the legislature sort of looking at new proposals, and you've got great legislative staff, and to make time to say, okay, this sounds great for your organization or your system of care. What do we anticipate the impact would be on homelessness in Vermont? To make time for those questions and those answers. Continue to support programs that are working, as well as new investments such as VHIP that address affordability, supply, and access challenges. That advocates and legislatures be open to supporting balanced policies which acknowledge that in most instances, people receiving shelter can share some accountability and participate in activities to support longer-term sustainability. And depending on their situation, that might be treatment, it might be employment, it might be housing case management, all of the above, none of the above. We've got to be we've got to be ready to look at that, though, and not just think of people in shelter as sort of passive folks who aren't a huge part of the solution. That we as leaders remember that most everyone involved, state employees, legislators, nonprofit workers, people experiencing homelessness, municipalities, are doing their best in this moment, and to try to avoid having our frustrations at the behavior of a small number of people dictate how we think about and treat the vast majority of Vermonters who are homeless. And finally, and similarly, that we avoid having our frustrations at these larger systems, policy issues, and programs dictate how we treat the people trying to navigate and survive in those systems. You've all been very patient with me. I've reached the end of my prepared notes and would love to answer any questions the committee has.
Thank you, Angus. And those notes are going to be posted if they're not already up to our website. No, I appreciate your candor. Your comments are always taken with the best of intentions. I know that, again, having been working in this industry for this 20 years, you've seen quite a bit. Here's an unpopular question for you. We've had advocates come in and say, we can end homelessness. And it's this, is that a pipe dream? You know, I think there's a difference between having that advocacy pipe dream and what's on the street. And I'm just curious to know from your work on the street, how do you know, is that what you seek to do, or are you too much in the what's right in front of you?
Well, it's interesting how often I wrestle with that same question. It was literally today going out the door. And I think I've been looking back at some older policies the state of Vermont had and plans to end homelessness. And I think it was in thinking about those and thinking about what we may have had in the past and thinking about the titles of all of them. And they generally are fairly optimistic. It's a 5-year plan to end homelessness. It's a blueprint to roadmap to ending homelessness. And I think I actually, in my own personal journey, had to get away from that language because it is, it's too frustrating to be trying to end something every year. I think where I make peace with it is the idea of we can end homelessness for the person we're meeting with today. And 19 times out of 20, we can do that. We can work with somebody, get them housed, and they will stay housed. And it might be more work or it might be easy. But I think I'm not sure that a state, city, country saying we're going to end homelessness on a certain timeline, I think we're setting up the people who are going to take on that struggle, we're setting them up for some real disillusionment because we're not behaving when we think of those other policies, we're not necessarily behaving like that's our top priority, right? The priorities are often around cost savings and what happens on a short cycle. So I would not be comfortable telling any policymaker that I have a plan to end homelessness writ large at the population level. I think it will be, as long as housing costs money and tenancy requires adherence to certain behavior, there will be people who struggle. And I like being part of the group that's helping them stay housed, but I'm not going to run with the slogan of ending homelessness in Vermont right now.
Representative Howard, thank you, Angus.
Thank you. And thank you, Angus, for the work that you do. It is, it's tremendous. Rutland County really appreciates it. I do have a question regarding people coming from other counties and other states. The other counties, I don't seem to hear a problem with, but people coming from other states, is there any kind of screening that is done or anything like that?
So I mentioned that there's a little bit of a disconnect between the system that most of the funded providers use, like us, we use coordinate entry, and then the process as it works with people who are contacting Economic Services Division for emergency shelter, whether that was transitional or adverse weather or something else. So for what I understand, let's look at where, I guess the way to start is more people seem to be coming in through that state side at the present time. I believe, and you really want someone from the state to confirm this, but I believe they're asked, if somebody's arriving from another state, do you intend to stay in Vermont? And if they indicate that they intend to stay in Vermont, they have met the residency requirement. We're often interested, I think where it comes up in our world is, if we're trying to establish a 5-year rental history, we can certainly see patterns about where those residences were. And where are somebody's system of supports? That's a really good way to figure out, where does somebody really want to be? Maybe they're in Rutland now, but maybe they have both a plan, they might have a plan and a desire to get back to somewhere else. And sometimes we can support that. Particularly if they have a viable housing plan, then we would want to partner with whoever our counterparts are and make that happen. Just because what I understand is Vermont's housing shortage is in some, I think it's more acute than, at least at the state level, than most other states. There may be cities that have a worse shortage, but state to state comparison, there aren't many other places where it's as challenging as Vermont to find housing.
Thank you.
Representative LaBounty.
Thank you. Is there any information out there that would tell us how many of those homeless are veterans?
Yes, there is. I think there is some information. It may have come in through last week during the Homelessness Awareness Day. There is a point in time count, which may not count everybody, but it's a really good proxy for how many people are homeless in Vermont. And that did have the veterans numbers and what the percentage was.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions for Angus right now? I just want to be conscious of the time. Angus, I truly appreciate you spending the time with us, and I'm glad that you can testify from Rutland today. As much as we'd like to see you in 3D, but I think these issues aren't going away, and we'll be back in touch as we get legislation and we start dealing with these issues and trying to sort out what may happen after March 31st, et cetera, and try to make sure that the tools, because the next chapter, if we had another half an hour, I'd be asking you tell us about capacity, and what does that mean, not just in the number of units, but also your capacity to continue doing this work with a limited staff and all those things that we know are issues as well, but we'll save that for another day.
Thank you so much.
Benjamin, before we go.
I don't have a question, but I would like to say that I would like to meet with you and get a better idea of how you interact and cooperate with all of the other entities in Rutland to do the work that you do.
Great. Happy to.
All right. Thank you, Angus. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Take care.